From the 19th to the early 20th century, the frontier kept moving forward and became a legend. Facts and exaggerations blended together. Cowboys on long rides, towns rising overnight, and noon duels. Some stories stand out. A doctor supposedly made boots in a bag from an outlaw's skin. A thief left poems inside the safes he cracked. On screen, this stage still brings ambition, fear, and opportunity. Ready for the 25 stories? Number 1. George Big Nose Parrott, feared in the Old West, had an after-death that matched his fame. Lynched in 1881, he was handed over to doctor and politician John Eugene Osborne of Wyoming. From the outlaw's hide, Osborne had a pair of boots made and wore them when he took office as governor. It also became a briefcase. The skull, sawed in half, went from desk to desk. An ashtray, a doorstop, and a pencil holder for pioneer Lillian held. As if that weren't enough, Osborne and his colleague Thomas Mackey cut open the body looking for signs in the brain that might explain the violence, an experiment that sealed Parrott's morbid legacy and revealed the mix of scientific curiosity and spectacle that defined the time. Number 2. John Wesley Hardin roamed the Old West as a synonym for danger. In court, he claimed to have taken 41 lives. Later, he spent over 20 years behind bars. Back on the streets, it didn't last long. In 1895, he was shot in the back by John Selman in a saloon in El Paso. Before that, in 1877, a night of cards and drinking in Abilene, Kansas, ended in tragedy. Staying next door to Farmer Charles Huger, Hardin woke up to snores coming through the wall. He yelled for quiet. Nothing. Impatient, he fired. The bullets tore through the neighboring room and killed Huger, who never even woke up. The story sums up just how short his trigger was. Number 3. Fort Griffin in Texas was born at the meeting of Clear Creek in the Brazos and became a crossroads of the West. There, cowhands, gunmen, buffalo hunters, outlaws, gamblers, and prostitutes all crossed paths. The constant bustle earned it the nickname Babylon on the Brazos. Among the visitors were names that fuel legends. John Wesley Hardin, the dentist Doc Holliday, a regular at the card tables, and Kate, the big-nosed woman. Fort Griffin worked like a showcase of the era. Loose rules, quick profits, card tables, and dusty streets, where order and chaos fought for every corner. From there came stories that fed the myth of the Old West and still echo along the banks of the Brazos. Number 4. They say the Old West also had thieves with gloves and verses. Charles Airbulb's Black Bart the poet became a legend this way. Born in England, he landed in New York with his family in 1831. Years later, during the gold rush of 1849, he moved to California, and that's where his path changed. Instead of mining, he set his sights on Wells Fargo stagecoaches, then a symbol of money on the move. Polite and calm, he robbed without fuss, and as his signature left poems in the emptied safes. He pulled off 28 hits, was eventually caught, served his time, and decided to call it quits. Retired from crime, he returned to New York. He closed his own story in 1917, with his robberies remembered as much for the verses as for the boldness. Number 5. In the Old West, whiskey was more than just a drink. It was a test of courage. Called FireWater, it earned its name when traders would toss a shot onto hot coals to impress native peoples, and the flames answered back, proof of its crazy alcohol content. The recipe, far from conventional, mixed burnt sugar, chewing tobacco, and raw alcohol, resulting in a rough, straight-to-the-point liquid. Because of that, even hardened gunmen felt the hit. Just one shot was enough to silence the saloon. Everyone knew that was the most feared bottle on the frontier, able to loosen tongues, buckle knees, and turn any night upside down. Number 6. Elmer J. McCurdy died in a shootout with the police in 1911 in Oklahoma. Since no one claimed the body, funeral director Joseph L. Johnson embalmed him and saw a business opportunity. He dressed the dead man like an outlaw, put a rifle in his hands, and charged a penny for each visitor to see him up close. The funeral home turned into an improvised sideshow. People paid at the door. Years later, 2 men showed up claiming to be Elmer's brothers. They took the body, and from then on the story went another way. Instead of rest, he became a traveling carnival attraction, displayed as a curiosity. What was left of him ended up in a Los Angeles storage space where he was forgotten until 1949. Only 27 years later did he finally get a burial. Number 7. When it comes to crime in the Old West, the name that stands out is Jesse James, but many point to his older brother Frank as the more ruthless one. Together, they led the James Younger gang, responsible for robbing banks and trains, often leaving employees and civilians among the victims. Jesse's death in 1882 changed everything. Frank went to the governor of Missouri and turned himself in, summing up his own life with the words, "I literally lived in the saddle. I never knew a day of perfect peace." He faced trials, was acquitted, and chose a normal life. He spent 3 decades away from crime, switching between jobs and trades until his death in 1915. Number 8. Known as Deacon Jim, James Killer Miller roamed the West like a ghost that was hard to stop. Officially, the law pinned 14 killings on him. Other accounts raise the number to 50. He's also credited with the shot that silenced Pat Garrett, the sheriff famous for gunning down Billy the Kid. His life was full of contrasts. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, and dressed for service, helped out at the Methodist Church. Out in the field, he wore a steel plate on his chest that once saved his life after 4 bullets hit him. Protection hidden under his coat. That's where the nickname Killer Deacon came from, a mix of pulpit and trigger. With every story, his legend grew, built on discipline and cold-blooded calculation. In 1909, though, a rope brought an end to the myth and to his air of invincibility. Miller left the stage as a symbol of a West where faith, ambition, and violence ran on the same track. Number 9. In 1870, a traveler stopped at a rest spot in New Mexico, on the road between Elizabethtown and Taos. The place belonged to Charles Kennedy and his wife Rose, of Ute origin. When the newcomer arrived, the couple's 5-year-old son broke the silence with a chilling warning. His father was a killer and planned to murder him. Minutes later, the prediction came true. Kennedy shot the traveler dead and, to silence the accusation, killed the boy as well. It wasn't an isolated case. For years, he ambushed those who passed by his cabin, stealing their belongings and leaving behind a trail of deaths in the Old West. Number 10. In 1870s Kansas, the Bender family ran a small inn along the trail. John, his wife Elvira, their daughter Katie, and John Jr. Travelers would stop to rest, and little by little, the region began to notice people disappearing without a trace. Some feared witchcraft. There was no proof. Tension grew until neighbors, tired of living in fear, searched the property. In the cellar, they found the answer: shallow graves holding the bodies of the missing. From then on, the hunt was relentless. Most of the Benders were killed when caught. Katie died in a fire. The case entered the lore of the Old West as a reminder that a road and a shelter didn't always mean safety. To this day, the episode shows how everyday life can hide silent dangers. Number 11. In the Old West, anyone who played cards learned early a basic survival rule: back to the wall, eyes on the door. In 1876, in Deadwood, South Dakota, James Butler Hickok, the famous Wild Bill, followed the ritual at the Nutella and Mance Saloon. Facing the main entrance, he seemed protected, but safety there was relative. Jack McCall, driven by revenge, avoided the front door, came in through the back and fired point blank. The shot silenced the table and ended the life of one of the most famous gunmen of the West. Proof that even good practices have loopholes. In that moment, the life-saving rule showed its limit. Number 12. They called her Big Nose Kate, on the record Mary Catherine Harney. She was born into wealth but was orphaned young and grew up in houses that weren't her own. She married, lost her husband, and with nothing tying her down, headed to Texas. There, she made a living between the saloon and the rooms, dancing and negotiating her hours. It was in that world that she met Doc Holliday, a card player and quick trigger who later joined Wyatt Earp in the gunfight at the OK Corral. Their bond turned into romance and partnership. When he landed in jail, Kate pulled off the unlikely, She set fire to a shed, drew a crowd, and cleared the way for his escape, cutting short a sentence that seemed certain. History painted her as an accomplice, but she also stood out as a woman determined to choose her own path in a West that demanded a heavy price from anyone who hesitated. Number 13. In the Old West, the bandana wasn't about style. It was part of a traveler's basic kit, right alongside the hat, the revolver, and the horse. First and foremost, it was about survival. On cattle drives and long trails, it covered the mouth and nose to block dust, shielded the neck from the sun, and folded, worked as a pad to lift a hot pan. At night, it kept ears warm. And then there was the use nobody admitted out loud. One knot and the cloth came up over the face, turning its owner into a nameless figure, ready to confuse witnesses in a bank or stagecoach robbery. That's why, more than an accessory, the bandana was a tool. It stayed with the cowboy from sunrise to the campfire, serving 1,000 tasks, keeping secrets and reminding everyone that in the West, living demanded resourcefulness, caution, and something that always fit in your pocket. One square of fabric, so many uses. Number 14. In 1865, Alice Ivers arrived in the United States with her family, coming from England. She left boarding school behind and settled in Colorado, where the bustle of the saloons became her classroom. In Creede, at the saloon of Bob Ford, the man who killed Jesse James, she learned poker and found her stage. The table became both her trade and her showcase. With sharp calculations and quick talk, Poker Alice was born, a guaranteed attraction for a packed house. Her fame exploded one night with a $6,000 win, enough to silence skeptics and open doors. She knew how to use her presence as a weapon, distracting rivals, setting the pace, and filling the room. Each victory fattened her bankroll and grew her reputation. Later, she opened her own saloons. But the run came to an end in 1910. Alice shot and killed a soldier. She was arrested, and the career that had once set the Old West on fire ended behind bars. Number 15. Pearl Hart was born in Canada and, while still young, was swept up by the myth of the West after watching Buffalo Bill's show. At 17, she left her family and headed to Arizona, where her life would take a new turn. There she joined Joe Wood. Together, they chose a life of crime. In 1899, they robbed a stagecoach, a job that started out sharp but quickly went off track. Lost in the desert, they were caught, and Pearl made headlines. She was the second woman ever to pull off that kind of robbery, and the first to come out of it alive. Convicted, she spent little time behind bars, only 18 months, freed by a pardon since prisons had no place for women. The case fed the newspapers and cemented her image as a symbol of defiance against the rules of that frontier. Number 16. Imagine riding more than 3,150 kilometers on horseback. That was the bet of the Pony Express, which about 160 years ago delivered letters and newspapers in just 10 days. Between 1860 and 1861, the route linked Missouri to Sacramento through a chain of stations. To keep up the speed, riders and horses were switched every 12 miles, in a precise relay that kept the mail moving. The feat became famous, but it didn't pay the bills. In 18 months, the backers racked up losses of $110,000. The Postal Service chose to stick with stagecoaches, cheaper and already in place. The result was a short-lived end, leaving the Pony Express as a brief but striking chapter in the country's move toward faster ways of communication. Even so, its relay model inspired later lines and proved that logistics could shrink distances long before the telegraph took over the map. Number 17. The idea sounded exotic, but in 1856, the United States Army saw camels as a possible answer to the problem of crossing the arid lands of the West and South. Inspired by Corps in Asia and Africa, officers approved a test. 66 animals were brought from the Middle East and housed in Camp Verde, Texas. At first, things looked promising. They could handle long marches, needed little water, and carried heavy loads with ease. But in practice, the cost showed. Stubborn, they didn't take well to orders, spooked horses, and quickly became known for their grumbling and spitting, which hurt their acceptance among the troops. With the Civil War, the experiment lost funding and supporters. The unit was broken up. Some animals were sold to circuses, others set free. And so ended, almost quietly, the attempt to turn camels into a regular part of the army. Number 18. How did a gesture of victory turn into a tool of terror? Among Native American peoples, especially the Apaches, scalping became a mark of skill in battle. The practice crossed borders and was adopted by settlers, used to intimidate and control. In the 19th century, during the Civil War, 1861-1865, violence took on new shapes. William Bloody Bill Anderson's guerrillas turned to executions and excesses, spreading terror and cementing scalping as a symbol of dominance. What was once seen as proof of bravery also became a political and psychological message on the battlefield. Number 19. St. Elmo's fire appears when intense electric fields ionize the air, creating a blue glow. On stormy nights, the light clings to masts and rigging, and sailors of ancient times saw it as a sign of luck. Far from the sea, the effect also swept across the prairies of the Old West. Sometimes it flickered on the horns of cattle and the tips of horses' ears. Suddenly, herds and mounts looked like something else entirely, and that glow, though harmless, froze the hands of cowboys and gunmen, who would rather turn back than face raw electricity in plain sight. It was science in the form of light, but out on the dark plains, it felt like a warning. Number 20. Westerns usually show white cowboys in charge, but the real landscape was more diverse. Research shows that 1 out of every 4 cowboys was black. They drove cattle, branded and marked animals, broke horses, and faced rodeos. During the Civil War, while many ranchers went off to the front, the ranches were left in the hands of enslaved people who took on the work of managing the land and the herds. After abolition, many stayed in the trade, now earning wages and some autonomy. As they crossed trails and borders, they carried skills, stories, and work methods that kept the West's economy going. Even so, their presence was erased by the myths of movies and literature. Retelling this history doesn't just fix a statistic. It gives back the name and place to those who made the West work. Number 21. In the Old West, a reward was only paid when the bounty hunter delivered the wanted man to the authorities, body and all. The scene, remembered in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, summed up a tough trade. Long journeys, heat, and the risk of ambush. With photography, the rule got a shortcut. Instead of hauling a corpse for miles, they took it to a studio, snapped the face, and continued on with the proof. To make sure it was accepted, the dead man was propped up standing, leaned against the wall. The shot was taken quickly, and before the body gave way, the evidence was good enough for payment. That way, the authorities checked the photo, released the money, and closed the case. Number 22. In the days of the Old West, the saloon was the heart of the towns, a place for gambling, drinking, and music, but also for tension. Among gunmen and travelers, arguments flared up fast and often ended in gunfire. Movies painted shiny scenes with pianos gleaming and fancy decor. The reality, though, started off rough. Many saloons were shaky tents, thrown together in a hurry. The Long Branch Saloon in Kansas City became a tourist attraction. The original building burned down in 1895. Years later, it was rebuilt, keeping alive the lasting memory of that West. Even so, the fascination never faded. Between stories of courage and loss, the saloon remained a symbol of both camaraderie and danger. Number 23. Tatanka Iotanka, Sitting Bull, rose in the 19th century as a strong voice for his people. A warrior when needed, he preferred words to blades and sought to negotiate ways out of the pressure from settlers. His bond with the land and with the animals upheld the authority he carried among the Lakota. Years of clashes with U.S. and Canadian troops wore down his options. Surrendered, he was taken to a reservation. There, he agreed for 4 months to join Buffalo Bill's show, performing on horseback according to native customs. The tour took him through cities in North America and Europe, but the experience ended. He refused the pace and the rules of the white world. His legacy remains as a symbol of resistance and dignity. Number 24. In the Old West, women were the exception in territories shaped by cowboys, gunmen, and hunters. In the towns, there were 3 men for every woman. In California, the gap grew to 9 to 1. To keep the saloons busy, they were hired to sing, dance, and entertain, keeping customers drinking and the house profitable. In this entertainment economy, music and conversation became business strategies, stretching out the night and easing tempers. The stigma came with it, but it didn't define them all. Not every singer was a prostitute. Many were treated with respect and within local customs were regarded as ladies. Number 25. Geronimo, the Apache leader, is remembered as one of the men who fought the hardest to protect his people against the advance of Mexico and the United States. Born in Sonora, he was taken as a boy to a community that today is in New Mexico. From then on, his life became a series of marches, ambushes, and negotiations to stop his people from being pushed onto reservations. He faced soldiers on both sides of the border and paid a high price for it. Defeated in the end, he accepted Christian baptism and made a living selling bows, arrows, and signed photographs, trading the battlefield for fairs and exhibitions. His story sums up the resistance and the forced adjustments faced by many native leaders of the time. Do you like the Old West? Tell us in the comments which Western left a mark on you or what show you've seen about the subject. And don't forget to like the video, share the link with friends and family, and subscribe to the channel.